You're all clear.
Is my all clear? All right. Good afternoon from Dar es Salaam, where I am seated. My name is Aiden Eyakuze, and I have the distinct honor of moderating this Africa region Open Government Partnership Dialogue in our Open Response, Open Recovery campaign to look at how we engage with, deal with, get rid of coronavirus, or live with it as a new normal. This is being hosted by the Open Government Partnership, and we want to gather open government champions to explore what African governments and civil society organizations, of which I am a member here in Twaweza in Tanzania, are doing to preserve very important principles amidst challenges posed by this new coronavirus pandemic. We have, we're very excited to offer English-French interpretation. So please find the interpretation button. Maybe the next slide will show, Bianca, how one accesses the interpretation. At the bottom of the Zoom, you select your preferred language, at the bottom there. And if you want to hear it in French, please select French. If you want to hear it in English, please select the English language button. This webinar is being recorded and may be shared on social media to expand the debate beyond the people who have joined. We thank you all for being able to join us now. And we also appreciate that there are many of you on the call today. So we ask that you follow our guidance and make sure you use the chat function to add your comments. We have team members who are looking at the comments and they'll be sharing them with me and asking your questions when we get to the Q&A. And when you're sharing your chat, please introduce yourself so we know where you come from, which part of the continent or other parts of the world, so that we know who we are together. By default, you're sort of all on mute to ensure a smooth webinar without background noises and distractions. We will unmute individuals when they come to speak as we bring you into the discussion. So please, we want this to be a vibrant conversation. We have some very exciting speakers from across the continent. I think 4 of the 5 WHO regions are represented in this panel, and we really would look forward to having a good conversation. And I'd like to just jump right in, Bianca, if you could go on to the next slide to just give us all a sense of the COVID-19 situation on the continent. While it's coming up, I'll have to start by admitting that I know very little about the COVID-19 situation in Tanzania because we stopped collecting data and announcing it about 2 months ago. On the 27th of April, we essentially decided not to tell the world what our COVID-19 status is. Maybe that's a topic for conversation a little bit later. But that slide shows there are over 300,000 cases across the continent, over 8,115 deaths, but almost 150,000 recoveries. That's the status. How does it break down by region? And by region, we can see, next slide, Bianca, that most of the cases are in the Southern Africa region. I think here, South Africa is essentially driving that volume, followed by Northern Africa. I think those are countries like Algeria, Egypt, etc. Western Africa, Nigeria and others. Eastern Africa, where we are, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and Central Africa, DR Congo, Central African Republic, places like Cameroon. But you can see that the distribution is largely in Southern Africa. And then you can see the world distribution as of, I think, yesterday, where the Americas are leading with over almost 4.4 million cases, and Africa looking really very little there at around 224,000 confirmed cases. So a small fraction of the global pandemic caseload. And the third slide and the final one is actually, for me, a sobering one to make sure that we're not sort of getting complacent. As you can see, that curve is trending upwards. And we're seeing a rise in the number of confirmed cases, even though it says at the bottom there, the daily increase was down by 790 compared the previous day, but it's a jagged line. Unfortunately, it looks to be trending upwards. When you think about the rest of the world, yesterday or the day before, the World Health Organization reported that it was the biggest single day increase of COVID cases since this pandemic started. So we are very, very far from being out of the woods in this. And so therefore, let's look at how the African continent is faring with it. And we have 6 speakers in 3 blocks. So next slide, Bianca, so that we can introduce our speakers. Like I said, my name is Aiden Eyakuze. I'm with Twaweza, a civil society organization in East Africa. And we have the following speakers. From Morocco, we have Sarah Lamrani. From South Africa, we have Mukelani Dimba. From Morocco, again, we have Mr. Tariq Neshnash. From Kenya in East Africa, we have Mr. Philip Thigo. From South Africa, again, we have Hotatso Semela. And from Nigeria, we have Olusegun Onigbinde, who will be providing some food for thought and provoking some conversations with us. So without much further ado, I would like to go straight into the conversation by inviting Sarah. We'll start with you, Sarah. We want to find out a little bit what are the challenges and immediate needs of governments in this issue, in this space of COVID-19. What challenges has the Moroccan open government policymakers faced or are facing in the context of COVID-19, and what are their immediate needs at this time, Sarah? Give us your thoughts in 3 minutes, and then we'll come back with Mukelani. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Aiden. Greetings from Morocco. So first of all, I want to thank the OGP team for inviting me to this webinar dedicated to innovations from Africa to overcome COVID-19. This webinar comes under exceptional circumstances marked by the disruption of the economic and social order on a planetary and African scale due to the spread of the pandemic. In order to master these exceptional circumstances, it requires the combined efforts of all the actors, which means public authorities, private sector, and civil society. The solidarity and synergy of groups within each community and also between nations remain the only outlets. For the case of Morocco, an integrated plan has been implemented to counter the spread of this pandemic and to cope with the economic and social impacts generated by the crisis. Thus, the country has been placed under a state of health emergency. The borders have been locked and general confinement has been decreed since March 20, as soon as the first cases appeared in Morocco. In addition, all the vital forces of the nation have been mobilized to support the populations most affected by the slowdown in economic activity. And this in particular through the special fund initiated by the King of Morocco and created to address the uncertain national social and economic situation. These early preventive measures have enabled Morocco to avoid the worst. Indeed, the kingdom has more hearings, 83% right now, than deaths, and recorded 2.2% death rate, while the world average is more than 5%. In addition to these preventive measures, an integrated crisis management governance system has been put in place with the creation of a multi-stakeholder steering committee to monitor the epidemiological situation, a national scientific and technical committee attached to the Ministry of Health, and the Economic Vigilance Committee supervised by the Ministry of Economy, Finance and Reform of Administration. And characterized by its proactivity, the action plan developed concerns health, social, and economic aspects. Regarding the health aspects, Morocco has adapted its medical device in terms of infrastructure and additional equipment. It's also strengthened the coronavirus case management system. And furthermore, a credible communication policy has been established, which daily reports on the progress of the disease and hygiene recommendations. I would like also to underline that Morocco produces locally masks for all the population. It has now crossed the production of 10 million masks per day, which allows it to ensure self-sufficiency and also begin to export them. And in order to strengthen furthermore preventive measures, a mobile application has been developed based on Bluetooth technology and whose use is voluntary. This application notifies its user if they were in contact with another users who are positive to coronavirus. Regarding the support of and accompaniment aspects, teleworking and e-learning have been adopted as measures ensuring flexibility and risk prevention, respectively for civil servants and for school and university students. Thus, several digital learning platforms. Okay. In addition, the public sector has taken several actions to guarantee services to users. It should be emphasized that the measures taken by the Kingdom of Morocco to fight the pandemic have not been limited to actions at the national level, but have been extended to the Pan-African level. As you know, the Royal Initiative aiming to support 15 African countries in medical equipment and drugs to help them in their efforts to fight against the pandemic. This initiative is part of the African cooperation to fight the pandemic initiated by the King of Morocco, which has generated very positive reactions both at the African and international level. So the recovery scenario must be built on more social vision than an economic one.
Great. I think that's a great point you make at the very end, Sarah. But I heard essentially that Morocco has succeeded to some extent in flattening the curve, reducing the average death rate below the global average, in making sure you're self-sufficient in personal protective equipment, especially masks. I heard the figure 10 million masks a day. That's a huge number of masks. And I heard Morocco contributing to the efforts of 15 other African countries in a Pan-African effort. That sounds amazing. A different experience, I think, in South Africa. And I'm going to bring in Mukelani here to give us a sense of what is happening in South Africa, also on lockdown, but there's a big tension between protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. So my question for you, Mukelani, as governments seek to cushion their citizens from the socio-economic effects being felt, how can open government approaches to their efforts ensure it results? Specifically, what risks, Mukelani, to open governments should we be on the lookout for in the response and recovery phases, and what should we do about this, Mukelani? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aidan. And thank you for that presentation earlier, because the slides that you shared with us just demonstrate the sheer scale of the emergency that governments have to respond to. I've been made to understand that countries are likely to spend up to $8 trillion in responding to the COVID crisis. So, you know, the scale of that emergency, it also speaks to the types of risks that are likely to occur, and also quite immense risks at that. I would like to address the webinar to only 3 of those. The first one being corruption in the management of resources allocated towards the emergency. As we all know, a crisis always reveals the best and the worst of human nature, and COVID-19 is not different at all. This pandemic has seen an unprecedented marshalling of resources aimed at dealing with the crisis. We've seen social actors coming together to help increase the capacity of health services to respond to the pandemic. We've seen people working together to try and find a cure or a vaccine. We've seen governments and private sector and civil society coming together to provide treatment, coming together to provide emergency financial relief for businesses that have been affected by the lockdown rules and the stay-at-home orders that have been imposed in order to deal with the crisis. We've also seen governments and private sector coming together to the assistance of those who have lost income as a result of the stalled economic activity. And so these are some of the positives that we're seeing emerging out of this crisis. However, each of those interventions have created opportunities for corruption and profiteering. We've heard about instances where public officials sell food parcels that are earmarked for those who are in need. We've heard of instances where procurement officials and suppliers engage in inflating prices and price gouging on goods and equipment that are needed to respond to the crisis. So these are some of the challenges that we have to grapple with. Corruption is always there. The second concern is around the absence of accountability mechanisms. We are seeing governments acquire additional powers in order to rapidly respond to the crisis. Sometimes it involves bypassing the normal public policy formulation and implementation processes. But on the other hand, you see a marked absence of the oversight authorities and legislative bodies in that sphere. So all of the interventions that I mentioned earlier, some of them are taking place, they are being conceptualized, they are being implemented without or with very little oversight and accountability, a major concern. The last one relates to the policy directives that are being put in place which impact on civil and political rights. We're seeing some governments effecting changes in the legislation that addresses aspects of preservation of civic space. For example, freedom of information law procedures have been suspended in some countries. You have prohibition of dissemination of what is called fake news. You also have the deployment of the military in residential or civilian areas, with, as a result of having to, trying to enforce the lockdown rules. But in addition to those, what concerns me now is the rollout of cellular phone-based track and trace technologies, which are being deployed by governments as a means of monitoring the spread of the virus, also to identify and isolate positive cases of infection. There is a concern that some of these track and trace technologies can be abused through state surveillance of the population. That is to say, that they can be used for purposes that are not related to COVID-19 at all. Well, in cases where you have data protection laws, that risk can be minimized, but because those laws tend to regulate how the information is collected and used by the state and private actors. But only 27 African countries have adopted these types of laws. And just to conclude, I would like to say that although these measures, I think they are reasonable, but the test is going to be seeing whether these measures get sunsetted once the COVID-19 emergency period ends. Because if you retain them beyond this period, they become deleterious to democracy, open government, and trust in government. Thanks, Aidan.
Right. Thank you, Mokelani. I think that your key message, I'm hearing corruption, absence of accountability, surveillance potentially could come up. This seems like the open government idea is closing because of this emergency, quite a bit contrasting from what we heard earlier from Sarah in Morocco, where the government is trying to address this thing quite proactively. So I would actually like for my colleagues to put up a poll, because we're going to have a bit of a participation here. We're going to put up a poll whose question, and invite you to answer. The question is very simple. How satisfied are you with your government's response to COVID-19? How satisfied are you with your government's response to COVID-19? So it's been up there for about 20 seconds. We'll leave it up for an additional, let's say 30 seconds for now before I reveal the answers of how the 88 of us on here, unfortunately 87, I can't participate in the poll and weight it towards a more favorable result for myself. But that would be cheating, and that would be closed government. But we've got quite a number of you. 57% of you have voted. Come on, you're going to do better than that. We've got another 10 seconds, 58%. Maybe I'll leave it on for another 10 seconds, so that we can get a super majority. But 60% of you have voted in a minute here, and it's sort of fairly even-ish. Surprising. Okay, we're going to close the poll now. 61% of you have voted, and here are the results. I think all of you are viewing the results, actually. People are moderately satisfied. Moderately satisfied. Only 4% are very satisfied, but 44% of you are moderately to very unsatisfied, and 2% of you are unsure about how satisfied you are with your government's response to the COVID-19. So it's a mixed bag there of how we see the issue being addressed. One thing that is interesting when you're talking about lack of accountability, Mukelani, is, for example, in a place like Uganda where we have operations, it would appear that the military has taken a very key role in managing the COVID-19 pandemic in a place like Uganda. I wonder if other countries have a similar experience where really the military, even ahead or above the second priority when you compare with the ministries of health and other social sector ministries over there. So let me invite some commentary, and I'm going to surprise a little bit Zukiswa Kota, who looks at fiscal transparency in South Africa. I want you to react a little bit to Mukelani's first worry around corruption and profiteering. How can maybe civil society or government itself protect itself from these corruption, price gouging, and profiteering with respect to how it's dealing with marshalling the resources for COVID-19? Zukiswa, let me invite you for your thoughts and maybe your questions if you're there. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Aidan and Mukelani and colleagues. Yes, thank you for surprising me. That did actually catch me off guard. Well done. I think in direct response to that, I definitely would agree with the concerns that Mukelani's raised about the context specifically in South Africa. And I think perhaps I would respond or maybe raise one key advocacy space that many civic actors and open government practitioners and advocates are pushing for, which is really to just have much more transparent processes. I quite like the open response, open recovery ethos of the OGP, and I think one area, as Mukelani highlights, would really need to be opening up the procurement space and the fiscal transparency space, which at this point is not adequately happening in South Africa, despite some really important spaces and existing open contracting, open or potential spaces that exist. So I would definitely say that would be one space that's opening up and emerging and likely has implications for further work and future interactions or interventions in our context.
I just wonder, Zukiswa, just to ask you whether you think these ideas of open, transparent fiscal management just tend to be swept aside when a pandemic, a crisis like this happens, instead of actually being the tool to help manage this in an efficient and effective way. Why are they the first victim to go? Why do you think they go?
I think that's also a really good follow-up. In this instance, one of the things that's been of concern is using emergency procurement in a sense as an excuse to override a range of legislative and supply chain management related regulations. And I think those excuses at this point are just, they don't hold water anymore. There are spaces within the PFMA, and in fact, we've raised a number of, with a range of partners through coalitions like the Budget Justice Coalition and others, some of the areas relating to procurement at this point, and I think Mukelani's point, that he raises about officials and elected representatives taking advantage of this context really point to that. And so, in the instance of procurement of PPE and subnational health departments, for example, we are already seeing that while there are clear benchmarks set, by the national government and national treasury, as you filter down, lower down, towards the provinces, districts, and municipalities, there does seem to be this lack of accountability and increasingly a wearing away of what are fairly fairly clear-cut in some respects, procurement laws, even those that have been amended to respond to the emergency. And so the responses or the amendments, I think, do provide still for accountability spaces or accountability in that. And I think another point really to look at with much closer scrutiny is around the role of our elected representatives and the provincial legislatures and lower down within the municipal space. We are seeing some fundamental problems. And again, as you say, this tendency to overlook procurement legislation, to overlook openness. And in fact, a concern that's also been raised is that at the municipal space, while the normal processes of participation and transparency continue, there actually isn't currently a requirement for municipal councils to open up to the public around the intervention specific to COVID-19 and the special budget adjustments there. And so there are some concerns that do allow some advantage taking to happen.
Exactly. So I'm going to ask now Stephanie Mushai in Kenya. If government is not willing to use the rules and obey the rules and comply, whether they are elected representatives or the civil servants, what can civil society do to remind, to promote this openness in the contracting and procurement? Steph Mushai, you're an expert at open contracting. How do we get citizens and civil society? How can Twaweza play a positive role in Kenya on that front, for example? What are your thoughts in 2 minutes?
Thanks, Aidan. I think it's more an accountability question. So I think that some of the things that we're seeing civil society doing, for example, is forming watch groups that allow them to kind of concentrate on a particular issue and be able to keep track. It also allows them to have a basis for engagement with the government that's organized at this stage, because there's a lot of citizen feedback coming out, and it's kind of hard to keep track of, but the organized kind of groups are having some measure of success in terms of giving feedback on what's not working and all of that. So the watch groups are a good idea. I think the second thing civil society can do is kind of agitate to be part of the task forces. Task forces are a way of working for government. And I know that in Uganda, for example, they have both government and civil society in the task forces, but I know that that's not the case in Kenya, and it's not the case in many countries as well. So I think that civil society can be sure to kind of get their way onto these task forces to be able to have a voice on the table. The other thing that the last one, Aidan, is providing kind of the alternative information in a way, because they tend to be, civil society tend to be closer to the public and can generate kind of factual information in a simplified and actionable way for citizens to be able to use. And that way get citizens on board in terms of being able to articulate issues and challenges on the ground as well. Is my 2 minutes up?
Brilliant, Stephanie. Your 2 minutes are up, but I just want to emphasize, to prove what the point number 2 you're making, whereas I think Twaweza, number 3, we have been able to provide really fresh information to the government of Uganda's task force through some of our survey technology, and we think that they're shaping their own communication and how they're addressing COVID-19. So, but all of us who are listening, I think the first point Steph made about watch groups, we can form our own groups to actually focus on a particular area and make noise if things are not going well, maybe even praise a little bit if things are also proceeding nicely. Thank you all so much. Let's move on to block number 2. And here I've got 2 gentlemen who are going to help us with some thinking around open government innovations and solutions being implemented to address the COVID-19 crisis. And I'd like to invite Tariq Neshnash from Morocco, who will be followed by Philip. I'll give Philip his question. But Tariq, how have Moroccan civil society specifically partnered with other non-state actors, including academia, to spread awareness, to coordinate initiatives, to promote innovations in tackling the COVID-19? Give us a sense of what the non-state actors have been doing, Tariq.
Thanks, Aidan. So basically, the question we had back when the COVID crisis started is, what is the role? What is the new role of civil society during this crisis? And basically, we stepped back and said, what can we learn from previous crises and crisis management experiences? Think of like countries of conflict, of wars, think of earthquakes, think of floods. What would be the role of civil society on that time? And I mean, it comes down to basically overcoming the crisis is a shared responsibility. It's not up to the governments alone to overcome and survive, but also each citizen and actor should take a piece of the responsibility if we really want to get over. So basically, we asked ourselves, basically, I'm heading an organization called Impacts for Development. And we said, so what can we do as a civil society actor to contribute to the effort to fight the COVID? And basically, we thought what we kind of urgently need was find a model to aggregate the collective intelligence of the whole community, how to get to the power of innovation of all the actors, be it citizens, be it private sector, be it academia, civil society, like association, etc. So what we did, we partnered with two leading universities in Morocco, the University Mohammed VI and the University Al Hawaiian, and we launched an online platform of open innovation. So the idea is we invited all the actors, the non-state actors, to tell them how can we all together deal with this crisis? How can we fight the effects of the COVID? And basically, we opened up space for ideation for the partners to submit ideas. We did a catalog of different initiatives so we can share it with the community so they can cross-learning. We also had like a space for open challenges where institutions open and say, this is our problem, help us. So in the period of 2 months, we found like a few priorities that were kind of high on the agenda. One was the health. So many initiatives from academia and civil society where basically they produced masks and ventilators in a 3D printers. That's kind of later the governments consumed and coordinated with them to scale that effort up. We in the space of education, the challenge of distance learning, how would that work? How can we touch into the vulnerable zones and the vulnerable population? We had the third area was like social solidarity. We saw a lot of movements of people helping with funds, helping with food, to trying to be inclusive on their reports. There was an issue of media and fake news. How can we kind of like keep stable the communication around this issue? And one issue now that is kind of the top of the agenda is the economic resilience and how can we recover economically. And we start seeing new social businesses that are coming forward, like new delivery model and others. So basically, when we look and kind of evaluate these 2 months, we found like two top conclusions on this space. One is we start tapping into a new community that is not the classical open governments kind of classical players. So basically those are kind of doctors and engineers that got interested on joining efforts on this open government civil society plan and start to think about like they are also actors on the building of this open model, which we're thinking is kind of a very interesting opening to really enlarge the game. Second is we are looking into a model that is beyond the classical co-creation, co-implementation, co-evaluation, which because this is like an innovation. And that's kind of civil society by itself can provide and bring a new agenda to the table. So I think it's an interesting kind of growth of the open government architecture. So moving forward,
last point.
So my last point is like moving forward in Morocco, what we're planning to do is that we are focusing on some priority areas, basically health, education, economy, and public services. And also I would like to invite all the participants to think how we can coordinate together to expand this type of work beyond the Moroccan community to see how we can cross-learn and create peer learning from countries to countries. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Tariq. I was furiously writing all of the different innovations that emerged out of this model to aggregate collective intelligence. I like that very much. And that model itself seems to be a meta innovation. I think that was the second point you were making, an innovation about how to innovate when you're in a crisis and to bring all of society together to solve these problems. PPE, distance learning, countering fake news, social cohesion and solidarity, social businesses, all of this in 2 months. I think you should be the head of Morocco's new innovation department.
I love that you mentioned meta innovation, because I just asked Hussein last week if they have like the meta of OGP, so we can build to how to exchange knowledge across countries.
No, there's a lot of knowledge there. So that puts my next speaker and my good friend Philip on the spot. Philip in Kenya, you've been in the open government family for a long time. Tell us some highlights. We heard from Morocco. Tell us about some highlights that are inspiring you from the region, both West, maybe East Africa itself, and that stand out and that we should be watching and learning from. Don't repeat what Tarek said. We already know, very impressive work there. What are some things that are inspiring you, Philip, in terms of innovations in dealing with COVID-19?
I think, first of all, I think it's to mention that innovation does not happen in a vacuum. So basically, I think for me, the first inspiration is leadership. And leadership that is very much setting the pace of saying, listen, and this is what I think President Kenyatta did when he announced our first case, is that it's an all-in effort. So everybody needs and must be involved. So I think that's one. The second thing that happened in terms of two innovations is one, of course, is a national response committee. I'll correct Stephanie there. It is inclusive, only that the civil society who are there may not necessarily be your classical transparency and accountability organizations. They're very highly specialized around health systems. So we have AMREF and a couple of those guys. The third innovation, of course, is around a national emergency COVID fund that was not led by government, but led by private sector, but populated by also people in national and subnational governments. The other bit, of course, is Senate playing its role around oversight. So immediately there was issues around corruption. Senate quickly plugged in and opened up a public hearing online. Then again, civil society organizations like Mzalendo came up with a public participation tool called Dokeza Obonga na Mzalendo, which was more or less documenting and recording the Zoom calls and making it available to the public to give feedback to the Senate hearings. So I find that was a very interesting innovation, but also a collaboration between Parliament and civil society within the OGP framework. The Ombudsman, and I've listened to Mukelani's interventions around access to information and freedom for information. Ombudsman quickly ramped up the capability in terms of being able to provide their services online and being able to come up with quick hotlines to be able to manage access to information requests that were really much tied to COVID response, which was around why is our area around a differentiated lockdown? Why is this happening? And so I think that happened. And today you've seen that even today now, the minister is giving a press statement around the COVID cases by gender, disaggregated by age, by nationality, and what government is doing to mitigate that. So that is still happening in Kenya. Roughly then around the other innovations, like Morocco, we looked at 3 issues. One was food systems innovation, health systems innovation, and dignified work. So these are the 3 things that are emerging out of the population in terms of innovations that have to happen during COVID. So quickly, civil society, government, private sector came together, put together a food systems mapping tool that is under food situation war room that is multi-stakeholder, just to understand food situation. Quickly, in terms of democratizing nutrition information. Third, of course, is gender violence, which I wanted to bring this up. So there's a joint situation room between all stakeholders, including the United Nations and the ministry and innovators and civil society, including FIDA, in terms of improving access to services of women during this time. Lastly, quick innovation that I want to mention is, of course, using radio. That's an innovation still, in terms of how do you leverage artificial intelligence, big data, to be able to ensure that frontline health workers actually openly access information around COVID-19. Of course, we are doing things with UNECA around building capacity of African governments around data. So, and this is something I wanted to bring up. I am sorry, Adrian, but the fact that we did not necessarily invest in systems, right? We didn't invest in our in our subsystems of that data. It means that during COVID, then we have to resort to to systems that we don't understand. And so I think for me, our case right now is that as much as we're looking at response and resiliency, response and recovery, we're also looking at resiliency. So how do you ensure that systems that are coming within government, whether they are free or not, also pass some certain threshold of standards? So issues of contact tracing that Mokelani has mentioned. So those are, I think, a couple of the things we are doing. I can share more later.
Thank you, Philip. That's quite a lot. It's contrasted. It's at a systemic level, right? Contrasted with what Tariq was saying, bringing these non-state actors to do very rapid innovation. You're innovating how to manage things like food systems, health systems, dignified work, which I'm intrigued by. I'm also intrigued by the national fund. I can't remember its full name, that's being run by the private sector to try and fund these, and the fact that the hearings around corruption were online in a way so that people could observe transparently what is happening there. Thank you. So let me invite you for the next 10 or so minutes, some thoughts and comments. I don't know if I'll ask my colleague Maureen or Bianca or Megan if there's anything that's really standing out from the chat. In the meantime, I want to, again, surprise. I like surprising people. Madame Fatou Senghor in Senegal, access to information is, I think, your specialty. Fatou, in French or in English, I'd like for you to comment a little bit on what you are seeing or unhappy about, if you're unhappy, with respect to how governments and civil society have been responding from a transparent information perspective. I told you about Tanzania, no information at all about coronavirus. Fatou, what do you think about the importance of transparency and information? Welcome, Fatou. En français, si vous préférez. Hello? Maybe Fatou is not quite there.
Yeah.
Hello, Fatou. There you are. Very good.
So all right. Thank you very much. I think the importance of access to information cannot be overemphasized. Obviously, as the previous speaker mentioned, Mokelani particularly, we've seen across the region some frustrations in relation to accessing to critical information. But I would like probably also to mention that there have been some good things. There have been some good things, especially at the very beginning of the outbreak. We've seen countries really coming together in terms of bringing together, rather, all the stakeholders to support the national effort in sensitizing, but also in mobilizing resources. And I think when I looked at it, I say we missed great opportunity, because at the very beginning, we've seen citizens' involvement, we've seen public buy-in, supporting public policy, supporting. But what we've seen at the end is that as we go along, we're seeing less transparency, countries using less the procurement laws to, bypassing rather the procurement laws to provide public services, which I think it could be understood in circumstances of emergency. But why I think what has struck us a lot is that we've heard in less than 2-3 months, very big scandal of corruption. And I think that has really slowed down the energy of the public. And now in most countries, there is a big tension. There is a big tension between the imperative of moving fast, restricting rights, but on the other hand, also people are demanding more accountability. And there's a lot of suspicion between what government is doing and what citizens are expecting. And I think that is something that is really unfortunate. And we miss a great rendezvous with history of really building, public trust, throughout this fight of COVID against COVID-19. The other positive thing that we've seen also is that at the regional level, we've seen regional bodies really being very proactive. Like at the ECOWAS region, we've seen them working together in terms of aggregating data. On a daily basis, ECOWAS will provide the information on each country, which I think is always good to help to have the big picture, but also to enable people to see where the hotspots are and also prepare the policies. And they are working together also on how they are opening the borders collaboratively, looking at what policies to put in place, to gradually open the borders. And I think these are a few positive things that we are seeing, and these are provided, information is provided to citizens. So more or less, when you are an ECOWAS citizen, at least following the trends, you know what is happening in the region in a synopsis. But also at each region, at each country level, there are some efforts by government to hold press briefings on a daily basis, to provide graphics, to provide more information. Here in Senegal, for example, there have been some challenges because at the beginning, they were disaggregating the data. They were really talking about the origin, but it created some stigma. It created some stigma, people from certain countries, also Senegalese who came from some other countries. So it created some public outcry. And I think that is also something that pushed the government not to openly give a lot of information in terms of the origins of the cases by naming like the countries where they are coming from or they travel to, just to avoid stigma in the different areas. But in a nutshell, I believe that we've seen a lot of restriction in terms of access to information, and that has hampered the media. That has hampered the work of the media. And when we look at the issues around fake news, around disinformation, I believe it is a big challenge. But the way to counter it is to provide more information, be more accountable, and continually to build public trust. And that is what we are missing in this situation, which we believe that should be corrected by many governments.
It seems like journalists are likely to be under pressure to not reveal the reality of the situation. There's a question here from Jeanne Irene, I think. I won't pronounce the last name. Is there a mechanism put in place in your countries? I'll come to Philip on this one. Put in place in Kenya to allow journalists to get information to counter disinformation while reporting on issues related to COVID-19. Are journalists free to dig and say their piece? Philip, first you and then Tariq in Morocco. How free are journalists there to counter COVID-19? Start with you, Philip.
And it's simple, yes, they are. There's actually a press conference every day, and and because of safe distancing, it's actually media who actually come, and media is media have been designated also as part of essential services, so they have actually a special pass that they can move around even during lockdowns. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, fantastic. Tariq, in Morocco, are mechanisms there for journalists to get what information is required?
So this is a good question. The whole, fake news issue. There were like two ways that has been historically been fought. One is like through laws and policies. So Morocco came up with like the law, a specific law to kind of forbid in a way and make it a crime to share fake news in social media and stuff. But technology goes faster than laws. So we know like fighting fake news has been a research topic in many universities and in many research centers. We have few projects within civil society and academia on building basically tools to detect fake news. They are like crowdsourcing groups of journalists and civic society that kind of detect fake news. There's also partnership between TV stations, the newspapers, and civil society to detect fake news. I think we don't have the answer to this question yet, frankly. We're looking at the US, we still think we need more innovation in this space.
Okay, it's a challenge, a good challenging space here. When the situation is like this, how much do you allow freedom of expression and information? We prefer that it is open. Governments have a different view. They tell us that they're trying to avoid panicking the population and the things that come out of that. So let's continue on to the third block here. And this one is a little bit more open, and I'm going to ask my colleagues, my friends and panelists, Oluseun and Khotatso Semela, to really reflect a little bit. And I'll start with Khotatso. What are the lessons that you are learning from where you sit, be it personal or institutional, from COVID-19 itself, how it has affected our communities and our countries in the continent, what the responses have been from government and from non-state actors. We had some great examples from Morocco. And what are the sort of long-term changes that you would like to see happen? So this is a really broad question, but two people who I think can address this, even just from your own personal perspective. Let me start with Hotatso in South Africa, and then we'll go to Olusegun in Nigeria. Hotatso, what are some lessons that you're picking up from where you sit across the spectrum of what COVID-19 has been doing on the continent and how we've responded to it? So let me I'll give you 4 minutes because I know it's a broad question. Welcome, Hotatso. Hello? I don't hear you. Hotatso.
Ah, there you go. You unmute. I needed you to unmute me, my brother. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Okay, now I can hear you. Did you hear my question? Did you hear my question?
I did. No, I heard everything, and I don't know
Brilliant.
if I should. I don't know if I should be anxious about having an extra minute or if I should be grateful. I think that just to formally introduce myself and just extend my gratitude to the OGP for creating this platform. As you said, my name is Hotatso Simela. I am a chief director at the Department of Public Service and Administration in South Africa. And I've been serving as the point of contact for the OGP in South Africa and the lead, a technical sort of lead for the African peer review mechanism. And I'm saying all of these things because as a civil servant, I think it's just fair to, in forums like this, to just indicate that, these are my personal views, although I would be happy to share the same views with my political principles because I think they very much align with our constitutional democracy in South Africa. So, having said those, doing the sort of housekeeping from my side, I think there are three key lessons or three key things that have struck me in terms of what we've seen unfold since we went into our hard lockdown at level 5 in March. I think the first is that, we've seen the real impacts of inequality in a very, very real way. And what that looks like in terms of sort of the lives of ordinary people at a mass scale. And I think and that's something that's been a very hard lesson for us as South Africa, given that we are a 25, 26-year-old democracy at this stage. I think the second lesson and the second has been around the importance of institutional capability. I think that we've seen how important it is to have a strong state or a state that has capabilities. And we've seen how, legislation and policies which embody the principles of open government in particular are critical for especially in situations in crisis of this nature or pandemics of this nature. This is where the state has been tested in a very real way. I think the third major lesson has been around the importance of strong civil society and a civil society that is not just capable in terms of advocacy and agitating, but also capable in terms of having response mechanisms on the ground, and I say this, as a civil servant again, that we would not have been able to do and to be able to respond in some of the ways that we have been able to respond, even something as significant as what we refer to as our risk-based approach or risk-based response to COVID. That was done because of the expertise and the capability of consortiums of experts and scientists that came on board and rallied with the state to say, this is one approach that could be used to respond to this pandemic in our particular context. And we've seen that also the other cohort of non-state actors, as Mupalani referred to, from the private sector, in terms of the responses that they have made with regards to some of the social nets that have been put into place to assist us to really avert what I think could have been a humanitarian crisis in our context. So those are the three major, I think, macro lessons that I can point to. There's some micro ones at the state level as within the public service, but I think for the purposes of this audience, I mean, I think for me, these are the most significant ones. Can I pause there perhaps and give others a chance before I answer your other, should I answer the other question too regarding what open government reformers should be thinking about?
Actually, no, I think let's broaden it just beyond the OGP, because I think the experience is so important and the lessons that you're drawing. One of the things that early on in the pandemic, South Africa was really being praised for, and I think probably still now, is the state capacity being tested, but also responding with respect to the community health workers going around the neighborhoods, the townships, to check and to do the testing. You know, that was like almost like a global model. That's still going on now. Has that slowed down? How is that faring?
In fact, that's one of the things when I was saying some of the micro lessons. So that particular initiative, actually, it was driven by the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development, but the capacities and sort of the infrastructure that made it possible was actually built from the department that I sit in, the actual service. I sit in what's called the service delivery and access branch, you know. And essentially the reason that was possible is, well, the two dimensions. The one is the fact that, you know, for many years there had been a process of developing what was called a community development workers program, where you basically have locally based people at the sort of provincial and then at the what we call the sub-national level, the local level, who were deployed to do a whole range of different sort of support services in trying to facilitate community development initiatives. And so that was the one dimension. The other one was what was we call the expanded public works program. So between those two programs, you know, basically there were already feet on the ground, as it were. There were some difficulties initially because the gap, the misstep that was taken was that when the categories for essential services were established, they were not initially included. And it was only at the moment when we saw that, you know, we needed to have sort of rapid testing capability mobilized and deployed on the ground that then that regulation was adjusted, and we were able to then deploy them on the ground. So we had two particular provinces that were able, because of the infrastructure and the systems being in place, they were able to do that quite quickly. That is continuing, and one of the other innovations that was included in addition to testing, when we realized the economic consequences of the lockdown and people not being able to generate incomes, they then began to be the people also used to test, to deploy sanitization, the sanitizers, and also to assist in the deployment of the sort of what are called the food parcels, you know, and the organization around the food parcels. So so some of those things are still continuing, to answer your question.
Fantastic. Thank you for giving us really quite concrete examples of state capability being present when suddenly you have this pandemic and they have an infrastructure, a human infrastructure on the ground to hold back the tide, slow it down in that context. I want to now invite my friend Oluseun from Budget, Nigeria, for you to reflect on the same thing, on similar questions. What are the lessons? From where you sit, looking at the long term, and I know you've innovated with respect to issues about especially fiscal transparency. You've used social media to mobilize citizens around fiscal transparency in Nigeria and beyond. So Shehu, what are your, say, 2 or 3 big takeaways or lessons from COVID-19 that you would like to see deepened, or that you yourself would advocate for being deepened? Shehu, you might be on mute.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, so great. All right, thank you so much.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Aiden, and listened to all the speakers, incredible insights so far. And you're giving me the last word before the general conversation. So I'm impressed. I'm excited with that and also a bit nervous. I think one point we have to get across is there's a tendency to focus solely on government and to assume and to believe that the pressure has to be so much about government. But the OGP principle around co-creation, around partnership, around bringing interests together, either from the civil society or the government space, this is the time that those principles ring true again. That we are going to only find progress if we're able to bond together as a people and understand that the societies where we live deserves a whole lot of progress. So my own first point is this is the time to bond together. It's time for citizens, civil society, government, private sector to reflect about the current society where they stay in and also understand that they have shared responsibilities in delivering the kind of society that works for all. And this is a call to the principle of the OGP around co-creation and around partnerships. The second thing that I would bring about board is also trust. When you look at countries that have managed the pandemic well and those who are still struggling to manage well, trust was a fundamental determinant. And I mean, even within the United States, a lot of people have come to see as a paradigm democracy and transparency and things like that. It was very evident that trust was lacking significantly. And you could see in countries like New Zealand, you can plot all the entire spectrum. It's also an important time to deepen trust between the people and its government, so that when there are positions or when decisions are being made, the people are able to follow through and also to own their own action. There's something that we also have to put on the table is how do we ensure that the OGP process, the OGP framework, or how we interact with government in our society, it's geared towards deepening trust, either by convincing government to be more fiscally transparent, to make sure the procurement system is more inclusive, or to ensure that the auditing systems or service delivery is much more robust. It's about all of that has to link to the citizens need to trust the government more. There's always a tendency for government to say, oh, we're going to take up taxes, but taxes are part of the social contract of the society. So the people have to understand that when people pay taxes, there's an expectation that they find from the government. A third point has to be about investment in service delivery. Now it's very difficult, it's very interesting, and it can be very we could be very forgetful to assume that we will talk about open GP and we believe we talk about the whole highfalutin and also the broad outcomes that we want through the OGP process around, we want beneficial ownership, we want open contracting, critical and fundamental to environment. But we have to look at everything through the lens of service delivery. How does open government, how does transparency, how does accountability work for the people? And this is not about a short-term gap. I know we are in an interesting and unprecedented time where PPEs are running out of Europe, where we know that people are even struggling to get face masks and hand gloves. But this is something that we have to put at the back burner, service delivery and an efficient service delivery that we have to give to the people. It has to be something on the minds of citizens, as the mind of government, and it has to be what the OGP framework or what the civil society or the government OGP framework are trying to engender. How do we ensure that even the whole agenda around open government reforms and transparency are all geared towards delivering efficient service to the people? So if people are not listening to us about the OGP right now, it's just because they were more concerned about their healthcare and about whatever ideas that we are bringing about transparency and accountability. So we need to pay extra attention to service delivery to the people and our efficiency about it. The last point I will make is process. Processes are also extremely important. We can overlook it, and we know that these times are challenging when government is trying to speed up things and try to overlook processes, but we must continuously emphasize that principles of fairness, of inclusiveness, of transparency are still critical if we're going to get the kind of results that we still want. So my own push is about let's still put a whole lot of conversation. Number one, that this is a time to band together, to work together as a group of people, either for government, civil society. Let's push trust ahead and also understand that this is time to reinforce the social contract. Let's put more agenda on the table on investment in service delivery, and let's still bring it through that processes are critically and important to a much more efficient outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shehu. You are echoing what Tariq was saying around processes a little bit, but also that we are pulling together. I also very much appreciate your advice that really we need to do some very systematic investment in social service delivery for the long term. Don't think about it when things are falling apart, because it can help you deal with these shocks when they come to the system. So we got a bit of time, 25 minutes before we end the call. So I wanted to sort of invite a couple more sort of views from, if I can find them in my sheet here. Here we go. On that front, and maybe I'm going to be a bit naughty and ask them a tough question. So Linda Ofori Kwafo and Mr. Elsheber Okech, watch out, I'm going to ask you a couple of tough questions that were already in the chat. And I'll start with one, maybe for Linda, Ghana Integrity Initiative in Ghana. Linda, there's a question in the chat here from Krishna Patak from Nepal, and I'll read it to you, for you. We face the challenge of CSOs getting politicized, and their credibility is often challenged. Now, I am curious to learn from your experiences, and this is for you, Linda. How does civil society maintain political impartiality and enhance their credibility and effectiveness of oversight and advocacy during COVID-19 response? How do we maintain credibility? And I'm all ears, because that's the challenge you are faced with in Tanzania as well, Linda. So help us to not be politicized, maintain integrity. What are your thoughts in a couple of minutes?
So thank you very much, and grateful for the opportunity. I must say that you can actually maintain your integrity and try to be what you've been doing all this while if you stay focused. And if you continue doing, so your work will show. So then, for instance, Ghana Integrity Initiative, we've always been criticized by every government that we belong to the other party and all that. But then, so that we are not more afraid. Party A will say you belong to Party B. Party B will say, that tells you the extent to which your work is hitting them, and tells the extent to which you're trying to be apolitical as possible as you could. Because that is the nature of our work. Yeah. We've been focusing on anti-corruption. So if COVID-19, we are identifying opportunities for corruption to flourish. If we don't play any role, and during this period, we don't keep quiet, but we still keep on alerting and actually letting governments know that if you don't try to open up the space, if you don't be transparent in all that you are doing, then we will think that you are being corrupt. So we are not silenced during this period. We have tried to continue work. We have actually to stay relevant during this period, because we are known for shouting on top of the roof that you are doing this and that. During this period, you don't have to just fold your arms and sit somewhere and then think that you are a bit unconcerned because you didn't plan to do COVID-related activities. And now COVID is here. So you have to make sure that you stay relevant and do what you've been doing all this while. And that's what we are doing here at the Ghana Integrity Initiative. We are very much interested in where the money is going to. We have always been interested in where government money is going. And so then now the government has set up a COVID-19 trust fund, we have actually tried to tailor our activities so that we'll be able to monitor to see where the funds are going. And then governments actually set up a trust fund and let civil society out. We didn't say that now that we've been left out, we don't care, we don't matter. But then civil society came together and we formed what we call the Civil Society COVID-19 Response Platform, which is being coordinated by an organization called Star Ghana. And then we actually then divided ourselves into clusters. And then each cluster will then focus on a particular aspect of the whole way. And we wanted to remain focused on what we do. So we are still within the cluster of COVID-19 expenditure tracking and anti-corruption. So then you don't shift the goalpost depending on which issue we are discussing. You stay focused on what your mandate is. And I think nobody will say that you are trying to be, you are trying to belong to
so
this.
can I just interrupt? Let me jump in here, Linda, and ask you this question. Is government responding? So there you are, shining a spotlight with a laser focus. Where's the money going? What is the government response to you?
So the government, government is not only the president or the ministers. We had what we called Business Integrity Forum, and we focused on COVID-19's impact on businesses. So we know government has what we call the COVID-19 alleviation program to support small and medium-scale enterprises. Then we actually invited all the key stakeholders. The MBSS was on the platform, government, and Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade, they were all there. And then civil society and the general public and businesses actually made contribution on how things should be done. in order to ensure that we are getting value for money, then we are trying to get that the money is going to the people that need the money and not people affiliated to government. Yes. And so they actually
are they responding?
Yes, yes.
Are they responding to you? Yes.
Yes, they actually requested for us to bring them the findings or the outcome of our meeting, and that is what we are going to do now. The minister's representative on the platform said that I want to see what you come out with, because you are saying that we didn't involve you in the task force. There's no CSO representation there, but then we have been able to pull ourselves together, able to make input, to contribute to this whole COVID-19 discussion, and these are the things we are bringing on board to help governments to ensure that we're able to get value for money. That's our own thing.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Now, before I bring in El Sheber with another question, I want to put another poll for everybody. And the question is, it's a pretty open-ended question, but please take time to fill it in. And the question, let me find the question. Sorry, I need to find it in my own notes here. Megan and Bianca, please put the poll question up there. Poll number 2. What has your individual involvement been in tackling COVID-19 beyond your own personal safety? I think the poll will come up at some point, and please take time to fill it in. What has your individual involvement been in tackling COVID-19 beyond keeping yourself and your family and your loved ones safe? In other words, what has your social contribution been to COVID-19? El Sheber, are you there? I can see you on my screen and you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
El Sheber, and welcome, El Sheber. It's good to hear from you. So I'm going to ask you a tough question as well. This is a bit of a governance type question here. Given what you've just heard in this seminar, and your own space where you work in coastal Kenya, here's a question from my colleague, Violet Alinda. What do you think? Are we likely to see reversals, post-COVID-19 or the pandemic? It's provided an opportunity for governments to be authoritarian, to take extra power to try and deal with the emergency. How do you think OGP can help in this issue? How do you think OGP can and should help? Speak from your own experience in Kenya and from what you've heard here. How can we avoid this risk of growing and creeping authoritarianism as we try to deal with this crisis? El Sheber.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. Actually, what I can say that it's like COVID-19 has taken us backwards some years. For instance, we are trying to fight to come out of the authoritarian government, but now COVID-19 has taken us back to those days. So what I can say is that, yes, there's chances for us reversing this. And the best thing that we can do is to have community-led engagements so that communities own the process. And if they own the process, then we are able to make sure that it's a collective effort in getting what you want. That is maybe coming out of the authoritarian government. To some point that communities need to initiate discussions other than sit back and wait for the government to come in to initiate the engagements. All engagements that are being initiated by the communities are likely to have a good ending other than the other way around. So just like based on the experience that we have, for instance, right now, there was a program that we're implementing, and it involved monitoring of government projects, especially the local government projects. And now, because it is the citizen-led, the communities have taken that initiative to select monitors who will be going to visit. They take initiative to engage the authorities that here there's a problem, and also having the evidence to show that actually there's a problem and it needs to be fixed. And they don't only accept fixes, but they have to be convinced that actually these fixes are going to help us maybe to have projects that are sustainable or that are implemented according to plan.
So let me just ask you, there's a bit of a chat going on here about hyperlocal. Elshaber, maybe explain a little bit more about the work that you're doing in the community, and then speak to this point that is being debated by Mukelani and Joe, who are both OGP people, gurus, about the really being very local with the response and the accountability and the reporting, really very local. Is that valuable? And second question, how are you relating with the central government, the government in Nairobi, which is far from where you are, I believe, in Kwale? Talk to us a little bit about how you're responding very locally and how that is engaging with Philip and his team in Nairobi.
Responding local actually is working, considering now we're enjoying the fruits of the devolution. So the feeling that the government is closer to us, the local government, the offices are near to us, the leaders that in these offices are people that we've known and they've been with us. For example, the village administrators, the ward administrators, even the governor. At some point, you find that it's someone maybe you've interacted with once, and therefore you feel like they are closer to us. And when it comes to even how these projects get to be executed, the process begins with the public participation, where the public gives opinion of the projects that they want to be implemented in their area. So being local means that the things that maybe you see on a daily basis, you hear about them, the leaders that you can see, and therefore it means that they are able to interact well in that very small setup, maybe even at the village level. And compared now to the central government, where actually the feeling is that it is very far from us. And it is possible for you to hear once in a while that some parts of the country normally say that Nairobi is abroad because it's being associated with the central government. That's where we experience that maybe there is a gap. So majorly, most of the engagement we have with the central government, it's always initiated by the central government. For instance, if maybe there's a bill in parliament, or maybe there's something that needs public participation, unless it's communicated to us, and actually people travel maybe from Nairobi to Kwale to set that platform for us to engage, is when we can be involved in that discussion. But if you look at the local government, maybe on my way to the village, I can see a project that maybe it's not well done, or maybe there's poor service delivery. I can actually maybe stop over there, maybe even share something through a WhatsApp group, or maybe through the Facebook pages, because all this, they have created a lot of pages. We are able to communicate and maybe raise something, something that can be done, or even call the local civil society organizations that, hey, my friend, there's something that is not right down here. They are able to come and see, or maybe organize how best the issue can be handled.
Okay, thank you so much. And there's a really lively debate in the chat about local. And let me give a shout out to my friend, Rudy Borman, who is there going to be, he's introduced himself. You know, OGP has an OGP local initiative, and we're going to invite, we are already inviting some national governments to apply to be part of the OGP local cohort. So I think this is very interesting what you're saying, Elshaber. Issues of trust, issues of direct accountability and effectiveness are already there. I want to take this up for the last 6 minutes or so before we wind up. Back to Sarah, who started us off. And, you know, I was intrigued by what you said, Morocco helping other African countries. Sarah, I hope you're still there. What has the response been, and how happy are you, no naming countries if you are unhappy with their behavior, how happy are you that your support, the government of Morocco, and maybe Tariq will have a thing to say here, with respect to how your support has been effective in helping the governments deal with COVID-19? Sarah, back to you. Are you happy?
Merci Aidan. Écoutez, on a donc constaté un vrai engouement de toutes les parties prenantes au Maroc, donc que ce soit le gouvernement, la société civile ou les académies, etc. Donc toutes les parties prenantes, une vraie synergie. Donc on a plus ou moins découvert que les paradigmes peuvent changer. Donc tout à coup soudain, donc tout le monde a penché pour plus d'ouverture, plus donc d'utilisation des technologies de l'information, plus d'innovation. Donc beaucoup de choses actuellement se développent en interne, donc c'est très impressionnant. Maintenant, bien sûr, tout est perfectible et on est prêt, donc il va falloir qu'on capitalise sur tout ce qui a été donc fait pour ne pas l'oublier. Donc une fois la pandémie donc n'est plus là, mais de capitaliser là-dessus pour donc développer davantage l'innovation et en particulier dans les domaines de la santé et de l'éducation qui sont des domaines très très importants donc et vitaux pour la nation.
Fantastic. So even the COVID has how should I put it, provided an opportunity for even closer Pan-African collaboration on a very real health issues. We tend to collaborate on political issues, on trade, on other things like that. But this health, that cross-border, is not very often that we collaborate. And I think you're right. What I've heard you saying, Sarah, is that we have to try a few new things. We have to set up new ways of thinking, new ways of collaboration amongst Africans to try and deal with this, including open information across the borders. I'll tell you, for example, back to Tanzania, we're having a bit of a, shall I call it a debate? I'm being diplomatic here, with our neighbors, Uganda and Kenya, because our truck drivers go there and they get tested, they're found to be having COVID-19, and the government here says, no, there's something wrong with the Kenyan test, there's something wrong with the Ugandan test. So it's testing even the East African community, this COVID-19. We need to find a way to really collaborate in an open sort of way. Maybe in terms of a final sort of question for Tariq, Mukelani, you know, you looked at the issues of transparency, corruption. What was the other things that you were talking about here? Let me remind you. Absence of accountability, digital tracking and tracing. These are big questions, big issues, Mukelani. If you were to pick one thing that we should really think about as a region and marry it to our open government partnership principles of transparency, accountability, and participation, Mukelani, what would be the one thing, which is a horrible thing to ask you to do, but one thing that you think we should focus on collectively as civil society, as government, as citizens, to collaborate on in order to try and deal with this thing, because I think it's going to be with us for quite a number of years going forward. What is the one thing that you would really want us to focus on from your perspective, Mukelani?
Thanks, Aiden. May I just cheat and borrow from the discussion taking place on the chat and just say, for me, that hyper-local action is quite critical. People that suffer most when it comes to corrupt activities and other forms of wrongdoing are people at local levels. It's communities we live amongst. It's not the elites. You know, so if we want to create impact, I think impact is likely to be found when we focus on what is happening at local levels, when we know what the extent of the pandemic at those levels, and we know what resources are being allocated, and therefore are able to reconcile what is being planned to the reality on the ground. For me, that would be where we should be focusing our energies.
Okay, thanks, Mukelani. And I'll give a word now to Philip. From where you sit, you know, at Center of Government coordinating and innovating, where do you think we should also focus our energies as government? And how can government be better at inviting civil society organizations to contribute in this fight?
I think for me, one, again, it's leadership again. And I think COVID-19 perhaps is not the best test case because everybody basically was caught flat-footed in this one. But I think, and I'll go to Ole Sean's point, and this is why even for our case, we're looking at a systems approach to it, because it means that if you, because we are looking at response, recovery, and resiliency. If you build resiliency, then you respond faster, you recover faster. And it has to be an all-in effort. So I think in my case, again, governments needs to understand that you have to collaborate. I mean, collaboration is not a question of political will. It's really a rational choice because I think if it's about development, then development is a matter of everybody. I think for me, that's the emphasis of this. And it goes to the core of OGP, where co-creation really must be the future. Whether you're talking about contact tracing apps, means also they have to be co-created, then everybody needs to understand the risks. When you talk about distribution or even financing, then everybody must be part of that. So it must be an all-in effort.
Let me ask you a final naughty question, Philip, because I know you can take it. What should government stop doing? What should government let go of, and let the people handle that? What should they stop doing? Because my government wants to do everything, including tell you whether we have COVID or not. They want to do everything. So what should governments stop doing?
They should leave professionals do what professionals do best. I think for me, that's it. Okay. Governments, I mean, a public official should not be talking health matters, and neither should they be talking technical issues. So don't do what technical people do. Just stay out of the way. And I'll tell you, this is what innovators are telling us. Just stay out of the way. Don't put taxes, don't create issues, don't tell us you'll give us money, it's not your business. Create an enabling environment for private sector to give us funding. So basically stay out of the way as much as possible. Create an enabling environment, and don't worry, people will find a way.
Okay, I like your confidence in your. It's a very inordinate confidence in professionals that we don't get to see lots of our government people expressing too much. But Philip, thank you for that, and I think I'd just like to close this really interesting debate. I have learned a huge amount from all of you who have spoken, from the questions and comments in the chat. I really invite you to go and look at what others who've been listening to us, Blair and Brendan, I'm going to mention names because they're here, and Alan Hudson, who are observing the Africa region from North America, I think, and Europe, on how we're handling it. Have a look at the chat. But what are sort of my major takeaways here? From Morocco, I really loved Tariq's team's model to aggregate collective intelligence. I thought that was a fantastic meta innovation, how to innovate about innovation. I think that was really cool. There are lots of ideas there on what they did to immediately respond to the need. Then the macro viewpoint from Philip on the food systems, health systems, employment systems, and dignified work, to try and handle those sorts of things there in a good way. Hotatso, from you, I learned about the importance of actually having a prior state capacity, what Philip called resilience. With the community health workers, I think they made a huge difference in what could have been a terrible pandemic in South Africa. I think they meant to stem the tide. And I really liked one question, one challenge you put to civil society organizations here, Hotatsu. It says, yes, great for agitation, but please also think about having the capability to respond on the ground. I think doing that, we're having a huge debate in Tanzania, whether that is the role of civil society, but I think it needs to be thought through very, very carefully. From Sheung here, issue about investing in social service delivery as a systemic change that we need to work on. So this is way beyond post-COVID-19, some things we should have been doing as part of our whole development trajectory. It now just shows how important it is to have those systems that are working in place. But finally, I think what is close to my heart and something that we're going to have to deal with as a community, as a society for a long time to come, is that this has really shown a massive inequality within our countries, within our communities, between the continent and the rest of the world. And this is something, the social contract has been frayed a lot by COVID-19, but I am hopeful that the OGP and its ethos of bringing different people around the table to co-create solutions, to work together, makes it all the more important. And a particular place for this to happen in an effective way is the local, in the local community. And OGP is going great guns to promote the action at the local level by promoting the OGP local cohort. So really, please keep on a lookout, watch out for that. Stay with us, follow us, give us your brilliant ideas. And to all of our panelists, I really would like to thank you all very, very, very much for your contributions. To all of our other speakers who answered our questions, thank you. And to our very many participants, we're up to about 90 at some point. Thank you for your time, and we hope to connect with you soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon, or a great morning, or a great evening, depending on which part of the planet you're on. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.